Shavua Tov, a good week to everyone. I hope you had a lovely Shabbat. Our tradition is very wise in giving us Shabbat to break up this week of Shiva because I know I needed it. I'm sure my sister Tamar, who's joining us from her home in Pennsylvania, needed it, and my aunts Eileen and Phyllis, who are joining us from New Jersey, needed it. So I was grateful for that break before we came back now to finish the last two nights of our Shiva. Just a few notes for those of you who are not familiar with the traditions. I look a little raggedy because you're not supposed to shave during this period. And I won't be shaving for the whole Shloshim period. And on the note of appearance, everything that you see me wearing tonight belonged to my dad. I took this, except for my underwear and the glasses. That's true. I went to the closet, I took out his shirt, which still smelled like him, and had a whole crying jag in the closet before I got on tonight. And my sister will remember that our dad never liked us to walk around the house in socks because it reminded him of being in a house of Shiva, in a house of mourning. And tonight he would approve that I'm wearing his socks because I certainly would never be able to fill his shoes. So just a few logistical notes before I introduce our service leader tonight. As we've done each night, we've had a different service leader. We've had different featured speakers, and then we open things up to members of the community who would like to share their condolences and their reminiscences with us. So tonight will be no different in that regard, although our service will be slightly different because of the end of Shabbat and the beginning of a new week, but I will let our Rabbi Or Rose tell you about that when I introduce him soon. So if you would like to be one of the people to speak, I would encourage you to go to the chat and make yourself known to Dawn Tausis under the Temple Beth Tikva heading. Just tell her that you would like to speak, and she will call on you at the appropriate time. Even after our featured speakers tonight, we do have a couple of speakers who would like to say something. Dawn is aware of that. I will call on them, and then anyone who wants to speak after that will be welcome to do so. We try to get all of this in 90 minutes from beginning to end, and so tonight will be no different in that regard, but if we skate over a little bit, my father would approve. So tonight, our service is going to be led by Rabbi Or Rose, who is the founding director of the Miller Center for Interreligious Learning and Leadership. And I want to stress the second part, leadership, because like my dad, Or is one of those rabbis who not only talks the talk, but he walks the walk. And even though he's a big macher at Hebrew College, which is where the Miller Center is, outside Boston and Newton Center, I really know him much more as the Rebbe from our little shtibel in Columbia County, New York, the Chatham Synagogue, and many of the people here tonight are from the Chatham Synagogue. Natasha and I have known Or and his wife Judith for about 20 years now, since the Chatham Synagogue was the synagogue at Malden Bridge. They weren't even in Chatham yet. And I like to say that Or and Judith are my favorite Jewish power couple. Judith is sitting right next to Or, and Natasha's favorite Jewish power couple. Judith is the CEO of the Jewish Women's Archive. So they are big machers, but they're also very Hamish and good friends. And so it's a pleasure to have them with us tonight and to have Or leading us in this service. So Or, please take it away.
Good evening, everyone. Shavua Tov. I hope that everyone, especially Avi and Tamar and family, had a restful Shabbat. And as Avi mentioned a moment ago, we've known each other now for 20 years. And I had the good fortune of knowing Avi's father, of knowing Sai for many of those years. And I want to say that among the things that I appreciated most about Rabbi Dresner was the way that he conducted himself as a senior rabbi, as a retired rabbi, in the presence of a young, emerging, and sometimes anxious rabbi in our congregational context. He was nothing but encouraging, supportive, appreciative, warm, and of course, he only spoke to me in Hebrew. And that was something that he did immediately upon meeting me and for years after. In fact, Avi, I don't know if you remember, but on one of the occasions when I asked you and your dad to do a duet about his work and your documenting of his work with a group of lay leaders from Hebrew College, he began speaking in Hebrew, and I had to remind him that he wasn't just speaking to me, but to a group of people, some of whom didn't understand what he was saying. In any case, it's a tremendous honor for me to be able to lead this service, knowing Sai as one among many members of our community and as this heroic person who over decades lived a life of compassion and justice within the so-called religious contexts of synagogue life, but also, of course, out in the streets. And we're going to begin tonight with Havdalah, and I feel particularly blessed to be able to lead this minyan at the end of Shabbat and the beginning of a new week, because the theme of Havdalah is about renewed strength and hope in a liminal moment when we feel like the warmth and the beauty of Shabbat is waning, and there's understandable fear as darkness returns and we have to face yet another difficult week. And Avi, your dad understood very intimately in his bones the relationship between the sanctity of Shabbat and then the work, of course, that we're beckoned to do, that we are called to do during the week, which is sacred in its own way, and the relationship between the two. So we'll begin with the Havdalah. I'll share the text on the screen, and then we'll move into the Maarif service. הנה אל ישועתי אפתח ולא אבחד, כי עוזי וזמרתיה לאדוני ישועה, ויהי לי לישועה, ושאבתי מים בששון ממענה הישועה, לאדוני הישועה לעמך ברכתך סלה. אדוני צבאות עמנו משגב לנו אל יעקב סלה. אדוני צבאות אשר אדם בוטח בך, אדוני הושיע, המלך יעננו ויום קוראנו. ליהודים הייתה אורה ושמחה וששון ויקר, כן תהיה לנו. כוס ישועות אשא ובשם אדוני אקרא. סברי, ברוך אתה אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן. ברוך אתה אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא מיני ושמים. ברוך אתה אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא מאורי האש. ברוך אתה אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, המבדיל ומקדש קודש וכל אור וחושך ישראל ועמים, יום השביעי וששת ימי המעשה, ברוך אתה אדוני, המבדיל בין קודש לחול. שבוע טוב, everyone. So next we're going to turn to the Maarif service. Bear with me as I change screens and PDFs for this brief evening service. Oops, just a moment.
You just closed it out.
Can you give me a thumbs up just so I know that you can see my screen and can read the text? Thank you. והוא רחום יכפר עוון ולא ישחית, וירבה להשיב אפו ולא יאיר כל חמתו. אדוני הושיע, המלך יעננו, ויום קוראנו. ברכו את אדוני המבורך. ברוך אדוני המבורך, לעולם ועד. In the two brachot that precede the recitation of the Shema, we give thanks for the cycles of light and darkness. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר בבואו מעריב ערבים, בחוכמה פותח שערים, ובתבונה משנה עתים, ומחליף את הזמנים, ומסדר את הכוכבים במשמורותיהם, ברקיע כרצונו. בורא יום ולילה, גולל אור מפני חושך, וחושך מפני אור. ומעביר יום ומביא לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו. אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, המעריף ערבים. In the second of these preliminary brachot, the motif of light blends with love, and we give thanks for God's love, even in moments of pain and of darkness. אהבת עולם בית ישראל, עמך אהבת, תורה ומצוות חוקים ומשפטים אותנו לימדת. על כן אדוני אלוהינו, בשוכבנו ובקומנו נשיח בחוקיך, ונשמח בדברי תורתך ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד, כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ובהם נהגה יומם ולילה, ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך, ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך, ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך, ובשעריך. We continue with the second paragraph of the Shema quietly, and then we'll join together for the third paragraph in a few moments. ויאמר אדוני אל משה לאמור, דבר אל בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם, ועשו להם ציצית על כנפי בגדיהם לדורתם, ונתנו על ציצית הכנף בטיל תכלת, והיה לכם לציצית, וראיתם אותו, וזכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני, ועשיתם אותם, ולא תטורו אחרי לבבכם, ואחרי עיניכם, אשר אתם זונים אחריהם, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם. As we transition from the recitation of the Shema to the Amidah, the standing silent prayer, as I often say, even as this prayer, the Amidah, is in some ways the most intimate of all the prayers between the individual devotee and the divine, we never go alone. We always carry with us the memory of ancestors, and of course, the great motif of ancestry and the possibility of transformation and redemption textually and biblically is that of the Israelites leaving Egypt. And so we'll chant Mi Chamocha, and then a more contemporary reading that I think befits this service and of course this specific moment as we think about ancient ancestors, but also about those that have departed more recently, including of course Rabbi Dresner. Mi Chamocha Bailim Adonai, מי כמוך נדהר בקודש נוראתי לא תוסף אלה, מלכותך ובניך בו כי היה לפני משה, זה אלינו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב, וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני, גל ישראל. One of the additions for the Maarif service, fittingly like that of the Havdalah, is the special prayer for nighttime. And in it, we ask the divine to gift us by casting over us a shelter that's referenced here to the sukkah of peace. Ushmor et tzeiteinu voenu l'chaim u'shalom yata v'yad olam. Baruch atah Adonai, shomer amo Yisrael la'ad. Here is a contemporary rendering of Hashkivenu that I'm going to ask Judith to read, and then we'll have one other reading before the Kaddish, as I said, reflecting on ancestors and our relationship to them before we move into the silent Amidah.
Help us, O God, to lie down in peace and awaken us with confident trust for tomorrow. Strengthen those who are burdened with sorrow. Grant them patience, courage, and strength. Guide them, O Lord, with your good counsel. Direct them toward the path of serenity. Shield them, we pray, from every enemy, from fear, from anxiety, from despair. Help them to feel protected and sheltered, sustained, even in grief, by your compassion. Guard them this night and every night. Bless them with healing and hope. Help them, O Lord, to lie down in peace. Awaken them with confident trust for tomorrow.
As Avi mentioned, there are other members of the Chatham Synagogue that are with us. And before we recite Kaddish, I invited Lydia and Bernie Kukoff to read this piece about the role of ancestors as we enter the Amidah. So Lydia and Ben, whenever you're ready. If you would just unmute yourselves.
Okay, here I go. God, our God and God of our ancestors. Why do we say both our God and God of our ancestors? There are two kinds of people who believe in God. One believes by virtue of taking over the faith of parents. The other has arrived at faith through thinking and studying. The advantage of one is that no matter what arguments may be brought against it, this faith cannot be shaken. It is firm because it was taken over from one's parents. But there is one flaw in it. It is faith only in response to a human command, acquired without studying and thinking for oneself. The advantage of the other is that because God has been found through much thinking, the believer has arrived at a personal faith, independently. But here too, there is the flaw. This faith can be shaken through refutation. But the person who unites both kinds of faith is invincible. And so we say, our God, with reference to our personal studies, and God of our ancestors, with an eye to tradition. The same interpretation has been given to our saying, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob, rather than God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. For this indicates that Isaac and Jacob did not merely take over the tradition of Abraham, each of them personally searched for God.
גדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, וילמד יברח ירותי וימיך מלכותי בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי לכל בית ישראל בגלה ובזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן. שמי רבה מבורך, ועולם עולמי עולמי יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו, לעילא מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה, דמירן בעלמה. We enter into the silent Amidah. Feel free to use the text on the screen before you or the quiet time, however is most helpful to you. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amecha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amecha Tasim Leolam. Ki ata hu melech adon lechol hashalom. Ki ata hu melech adon lechol hashalom. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amecha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amecha Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam. In addition to Shalom Rav, which is a prayer for a great and abundant peace, particularly focused on the community of Israel, I thought it would be most appropriate, given the nature of this minyan, given the person that we are remembering, and given the timing relative to MLK Day, that we also read the following, which is a vision of peace and wholeness from Dr. King that Sai was certainly familiar with. Can everyone see my screen? The World House. Some years ago, a famous novelist died. Among his papers was found a list of suggested plots for future stories. The most prominently underscored being this one: a widely separated family inherits a house in which they have to live together. This is the great new problem of humankind. We have inherited a large house, a great world house in which we have to live together. Black and white, Easterner and Westerner, Gentile and Jew, Catholic and Protestant, Muslim and Hindu. A family unduly separated in ideas, culture, and interest. Because we can never again live apart, must learn somehow to live with each other in peace. B'shalom. All human beings are interdependent. Every nation is an heir of a vast treasury of ideas and labor to which both the living and the dead of all nations have contributed. Whether we realize it or not, each of us lives eternally in the red. We are everlasting debtors to known and unknown men and women. When we rise in the morning, we go into the bathroom where we reach for a sponge, which was provided for us by a Pacific Islander. We reach for soap that is created for us by a European. Then at the table, we drink coffee, which is provided for us by a South American, or tea by a Chinese, or cocoa by a West African. Before we leave for our jobs, we are already beholden to more than half of the world. In a real sense, all life is interrelated. We are inevitably our brothers and sisters' keeper, because we are our brother's brother and our sister's sister. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. With that vision in mind, we pray that all of the words that we have uttered this evening may be acceptable before the divine. And we say again with whole hearts, Oseh shalom bimromav, uberachamav yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, ve'imru amen. The last piece of the Amidah before the mourner's Kaddish is, of course, the Aleinu, which looks to the future. We bow and we bend. We acknowledge God as sovereign of all of life. And then we look forward to a day where justice and compassion, where peace and sustainability will be enlivened in ways that we frankly can't even imagine now, when that long arc of justice will finally reach its zenith point. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שנתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם נטע בתוכנו, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים, לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, שנות השמיים ועשו בארץ משה וקרבו שמו. כי המלכות שלך היא כל מעל עד תמלוך בכבוד, ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך לכל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. I'm going to mute myself and invite members of the immediate family and anyone else saying Kaddish for Rabbi Dresner to join whenever you are ready.
Give my family a chance to unmute. Tom, Aunt Phyllis, and Aunt Eileen. All right, let's go. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. Be'alma divrach chiluteh yamlich malchuteh. B'chayechon v'yomechon u'chaye d'chol beit Yisrael. B'gala Karib v'imru Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah Amen Amaya. Yitbarach Shabbat Yitpa'al Roman Yitnaseh Yitadar Yitaleh Yitalal Shnei Tikudashah Brichu Le'elah Bechata Shirata Tushbechata Nefamata Damiran Dalma Mimru Amen. Yehei Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya B'chaim Aleinu Ya'akol Yisrael Mimru Amen. Oseh Shalom Mav Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu Ya'akol Yisrael Mimru Amen.
We're going to end our tefillah this evening with the recitation of the psalm that you see on the left, which is a common psalm said in houses of mourning, and it was requested by Avi. I'll chant in Hebrew, and the English you can see beneath it if you want to follow in one or the other. Mizmor leDavid, Adonai ro'i lo echsar, bihino dedeshe, yarbitzeni, alemei menuchot yinahaleni. Nafshi yeshovev, nafshi yeshovev, Yanecheni b'magle tzedek le'man shemo gamaki elech b'geit salamavet lo yirara Ki ata imadi shiftecha u'mishanetecha shiftecha u'mishanetecha ema yenachamoni תערוך לפניי השולחן, תערוך לפניי שולחן, תערוך לפניי שולחן, נגד צורריי, נשענת בשמן ראשי, נשענת בשמן ראשי, נשענת בשמן ראשי, כוסי רוויה, אך טוב החסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. Amakom Yenachem. I hope and pray that these kinds of services and gatherings, and that the presence of family and friends and community are sources of comfort and strength to you all who are mourning. And may Sai's memory, may Rabbi Dresner's memory be an ongoing source of blessing for all that knew him, and to those that will have the opportunity to learn about him through the work of his children, the memories of his family and friends and his grandchildren. Yehei zichro baruch. May his memory be for a bracha for now and into the future. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to facilitate Avi. I'm going to turn things back to you and say good night. We'll be in touch soon, and I hope and pray that I can actually give you a big hug in the near future.
Thank you, Or.
Koach.
So as one of the other speakers noted on another night, I think it was Harvey Hendler, he said that my dad was an Orthodox Jew, and he was raised Orthodox. He was educated at a yeshiva, and I consider Or sort of a neo-chassid. He's kind of like if the Baal Shem Tov had an earring. And so I think that my dad would have approved of a more traditional service for one of the nights, at least. And I thank Or for doing that for us. So we're going to shift gears now, and I'm going to introduce our first speaker, or our first speakers, I should say, as they're all members of one family. As many of you know, Zionism runs deep in the Dresner veins, and not just from my dad, but his whole side of the family. We had an entire branch of the family, the Dresdeners, with the D intact, from the city of Dresden in Germany. And I think it's not that they kept it. I think somewhere along the line it got lost, and then they restored it. So they're sort of the original Dresdeners in a way, but Ruti will correct me if I'm wrong. So we had most of our family was in Haifa, which is kind of like the San Francisco of Israel. It's my favorite city in Israel. It's the third largest city. And our family was mostly centered in Haifa. And we would visit Israel quite frequently as kids. And going to my dad's cousin Meir and Mickey was always one of the highlights of that trip. And their daughter, who we know as Ruti and the rest of the world knows as Ruth, is here with us tonight, as is her husband David and their kids, Gideon and Maya. And Ruti will tell us about their relationship to my dad and about a side of my dad that many of you will probably be less familiar with. So I turn things over to Ruti Dresner. You got to unmute, Ruti. Oh, got it.
Yes, I'm an old hand. Hello, everybody, and it's an honor to speak here. In fact, Sai commanded us to speak here, and we always did what he told us. So as Avi said, we're cousins, and today we had a bit of an exchange about what kind of cousins we are exactly. And I have to say that I'm a little confused and we haven't settled this issue. We might be, Sai and I might have been first cousins 3 times removed, or we might have been second cousins once removed. But I wrote it all down on an envelope here. I'm trying to figure it out. But this is the kind of thing that I left to Sai to figure out. I don't care. What is important is that, you know, we all have many relatives, in fact, but we don't keep in touch with all of them. We essentially choose those relatives that will be our family. And Sai and I were quite remotely related, but I think on both sides, we chose to bond and become relatives, active relatives. That was partially because Sai loved my family, and he welcomed me when I came to the States very warmly. Many years ago, as a young man, he came to Israel, to Haifa, where my grandmother received him and housed him and fed him. And he became very good friends with my father, Meir, and that friendship lasted for the rest of their lives. And so when I came, I think, to Sai, I represented that. And he welcomed me with open arms. But that kind of connection can only last a while because there was a great age difference and background difference. But I think we bonded for another reason. That wasn't directly the family, and I would like to mention that because it's important. And that is Israel and Israeli politics. Both Sai and I were very interested in Israeli politics. Of course, he could cite every incident from creation to now with the date and the hour, which I could not. But I was a good sounding board for him because I was equally opinionated. And so we had, I cannot tell you how many hours of loud arguments about Israeli politics. And why is this important? Because some people who read the publications about Sai recently might walk away with the idea that at the time, at the end of his life, he was a has-been, that he marched with Martin Luther King and was the most arrested rabbi, and that's wonderful, and we all admire and appreciate what he did. But he wasn't a has-been. He never rested on these laurels. He kept on being a very active participant in life. And that included in Israeli politics. Those who knew him well knew that he spent a lot of time and effort on supporting a certain party in Israel called Emeritus. Emeritus was an assembly of small left-of-center parties that were Zionist, but were intent on civil rights and human rights and opposed the occupation and wanted to have a higher level of economic equality. So there is Sai in a nutshell. And I can only say that last time that we saw him, that was in December, but I think about 3 weeks before he died, he still took a moment to confirm something that he already knew, but he wanted just to make sure he knew where we are at. And he said, so, where do you stand on the one-state or two-state solution? He just needed to know that. So we won't get into the details, but this was a long-standing argument, and we agreed to disagree. One more time. So Sai was active. Sai was very alive and active and impassioned about this issue. And I hope that other people at other evenings of this Shiva came who were related to this and could speak to it. But we should embrace all of his accomplishments, and he was very accomplished in that regard too. On a slightly different topic, but one other thing that bonded us to Sai and for which we owe him a great debt of gratitude is that he was a teacher to both our children, Gideon and Maya. When Gideon began to approach his bar mitzvah time, we were not members of a synagogue. Sai always thought he could convert me to become a practicing Jew, but that didn't work out. And Gideon was not interested in the usual route. He said he wants to learn about it and he wants to be bar mitzvah, but maybe in a different way. And I actually don't remember, maybe he does, how it came about that Sai was brought into this issue. And Sai offered to tutor him personally, not in how to read the parasha or how to chant the prayers, but how to think about being a Jew. And so followed 2 years that Gideon and Maya can tell you about, of intense tutoring from Sai. Those who knew Sai well can only imagine what this took. And after Gideon came Maya, and Maya went through the same motions. She said, I don't want to do the usual thing. I want to be taught by Sai. And Sai said, oh, I'm old and tired. This is too much for me. I can't commit to another one. And so he and I had 2 talks, and I became very persuasive. And so he agreed. He didn't say no. And Maya went through this too, another 2+ years of tutoring by Sai. And both of them learned a lot, really a lot. But what was most important to me, from my end, they can tell you about how they experienced it. From my end, what Sai bequeathed to them that is invaluable is a sense that they are citizens of the world, but they also have a very special niche in it, that they are part of and belong to a very old tradition, a deep tradition, a worthy tradition, a tradition they should learn and know more about. A culture, I should say, not a tradition. A culture that they should know more about, and that it is part of them and they're part of it. And that is really rare and unusual, to have someone have a child understand that. I think they did. And for this, I thanked Sai many, many times. But I'm happy to say and proud to say that he did not feel he wasted the hundreds of hours he spent with them. and he was very successful in what he undertook. So with this, I turn it to Gideon and Maya. Please unmute yourselves and add your perspective.
So I'm going to talk first. Gideon and I decided, though I am the younger. I had to think a while what to say, because I was very much a legend in our house growing up. I didn't really know him outside of him being my teacher, but he was, so he always had like this presence as like more of a character than someone I knew as an adult. But like that character was a very strong character. He had the photographic memory and the books and the old book smell, which is always going to be in my memory of his house. The constant litany and recitation of facts, as Avi has said many times this week, especially about the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but also everything else too, not to leave anybody out.
You need to be going like this as you speak, Maya.
Apologies. I'm working on it. So that's how I knew him. One Sunday a month when we were kids, my dad would drive first my older brother Gideon, and then me from Brooklyn to his home for a size special, which was 3 to 4 hours of a straight lecture on Jewish history. All of Jewish history as decided by Sai. We did that for years, driving out to Wayne, soaking up knowledge, and as one of the congregants said earlier this week, also the holy water that he was kind of known for. This kept up for years until he conceded not defeat, but a temporary truce. So I could get bat mitzvahed at nearly 14 because he wasn't done until then. So he was my teacher who knew and loved my family, and in return, we knew and loved and respected him. There is probably a lot more I could say, including how he is one of the only people I've ever met go toe to toe with my mom in on Israeli politics. Speaking of, here she is. A special night when we had him over for dinner along with another family friend, Lila Das, who has known 4 generations of my family, and it was very special to see them connect. Lila Das, who was Egyptian and a Copт, and a very, very brilliant woman in her own right, but it was something else to see such strong, brilliant intellectuals and minded people have dinner together in my living room. Aside from all of these little things that
Kutzes and Dresners, we're having a little bit of a glitch. Maybe if you shut off your video, we'll get the audio at least, because you're coming in and out. But now you have to unmute.
Sorry about that. Not sure. Take spectrum for that.
Are you with us? Because we're not hearing you. You seem to be frozen again.
So, okay.
Internet connection is unstable. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, David, but maybe if you guys shut off the video, it'll, but keep the audio, it'll help.
Right. Is that better?
So far, so good.
Okay.
All right, 3rd time's the charm. So I was listening to all this coverage about Dr. King and thinking about what I wanted to say about Cy as a civil rights activist. And I debated whether or not I was going to take it here, but I think it's worth saying. It seems like people often treat civil rights as an era of the past, something that can be referenced to sound patriotic and progressive. But frankly, anyone who thinks that Cy and the Freedom Riders did all the work that needs doing back in the 1960s needs a wake-up call. If there is any hesitation in someone's voice in saying Black Lives Matter, you have an open invitation to call me and we can argue about it like good Jews. That's the tradition I know growing up. I don't think that there's any way to honor the lives and service of people like Cy or like Dr. King than to not drop the ball. The way things are right now, it feels like a powder keg. Climate change is set to break us along the fault lines made by injustice already present in our society. I don't know how Cy would feel about me getting up on a soapbox right now. I hope he would be glad to know that he gave me a connection to my Jewish heritage that I can lean on for leverage with pride. I also really, really genuinely hope that some rabbi is going to do Cy proud and break his arrest record. Okay, so that's my 2 cents. I'm going to pass it off to Gideon.
Hello, I'm Gideon. Some of you I know. Some of you I know from 20 years ago when I was 13. I realized just now that I have the easy role here. I put myself at the end, and it's very nice when you realize that other people think the same things that you think, and so now I don't need to say them. And so I wrote here, for example, that it was the relationship, not the relation, that was important to me. So I'll just cut to the interesting part of that I would like to share with you, which is, I guess, I'll give the commentary first. I think that Cy is often thought of as being a teller and not a shower. But I would like to just share 2 memories that I have with him that were somewhat different than that. The first one is from 2011, which, as you know, was the 40th anniversary of the Freedom Riders. And in that year, Oprah Winfrey made some sort of, for lack of a better word, a party, okay? And many people were flown out to Chicago, which is where I was. And I was very graciously invited to join the after party of some kind. And I rode my bike there. And I went into this room where I didn't know anyone except for Cy. And Cy could feel my, I don't know if discomfort is the right word, but being a bit out of place. And he welcomed me in and he introduced me to people that he had known and that he knew from that time. And it was a beautiful thing to see him with these people talking very familiarly with them, having shared a lot of things together from that time. Most of them were Black, and it was just a very warm-hearted event, and I was welcomed into that feeling, which was very generous. And but that's still just the context of all. The real memory that I have is that I guess you can't see me. Maybe I'll turn on the camera for a second.
No, it is on.
Oh, it is on. Okay. And the real memory that I have, and it's very vague. I wish I remembered more, to be honest. But I remember Sai standing with all these people in a big circle, and they were all holding hands like this, and they were all singing together. And as you know, Sai was a terrible singer, and he knew that he was a terrible singer. But he stood with all of them singing these songs, you know, the songs that they sang. I really wish I remembered the song it was. He would know. And he sang loudly, and he was with all of them, and I must have not been with them. And he turned to me and he looked at me. And he looked at me hard, which sometimes he would do. And he didn't say anything. He just looked at me, and I remember that. And the other memory I'd like to share. Well, it's not really a memory, but the connection for me is over the last few years I've managed to learn a little bit of the German language, and in the last few times that I saw Sai, or over the last few years, we would be talking as we're talking, and some Yiddish word would come up. And for example, like the shtetl, this word shtetl. And he would look at me and he would say, shtetl, you know what that is, right? That's a shtat, lo. Because he knew that I knew that word now. I didn't know it before. And he would explain words like that to me sometimes. They would come up and he would explain them to me, and he would look at me like that from across the table or from the chair somewhere, and he would look at me and tell me that. And it was the same look. That's it.
Thank you, Ruthie and Maya and Gideon. Very nice.
Amen. Listen, I just want to say to Maya, of course, our father would approve of you getting on your soapbox. He would have gotten on his soapbox for the entirety of this Shiva and talked about everything but his death. But you know, he would have gone through every conflict zone in the world. He did it at our wedding. He did it at their wedding. I'm sure he did it at your bar and bat mitzvah. So that's what he did. So of course he would approve of that. And the other thing I will say, Gideon, is that you got one hard look. We would have killed to have gotten only one hard look. And Maya, you only had to get 3 or 4 hours of Jewish history once a month. We would have killed for that also. So you have no sympathy from me and my sister, either one of you, on that score. And Ruti, in terms of arguing with him, same. So thank you all for that. There was a member of the Dresner Kutz family that you did not hear from. You heard from him briefly, David, Ruti's husband and Maya and Gideon's father. And I just want to put things in context. David spent, before his career now as a photographer, he spent an artist. He spent most of his career in television and film production. And when Tamar and I were trying to get this documentary about our dad off the ground, of course, we reached out to him. And we had a very, very different conception of what the documentary was going to be. This is probably 3.5 years ago. And we have wound up making a very, very different film. Nevertheless, our initial conception was a little offbeat, and I wasn't sure I was going to do this, and I'm only going to do it under one condition. Dawn, you're going to have to stop recording. because we don't want this to get out to the world. This is not what the documentary is going to be. Nevertheless, it's what we thought it was going to be at the time. So I'm going to share my screen now. Thank you for that. You can see why I didn't want that getting out.
Copy of that though? Sure. Somewhere.
So anyway, so that was obviously, it's wonderful to see that, I have to tell you. I mean, I thought it would be difficult for me, and it was actually extremely helpful, and I hope it was for everybody else here as well. We've got a couple more speakers from the family before we open things up, and I realize it's late in the day. So if anybody does want to make themselves known to Dawn at the Temple Beth Tikva in the chat, please do so. The people that we have about to speak are gonna speak very briefly. Let me just share some. Well, actually, I'll do that afterwards. So first, the first person we're going to have speak is the woman to my right, my wife Natasha, who's gonna share her reminiscences about Dad.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Well, it's not really reminiscences. It really is going to be rather brief. I did not prepare a speech. There is really just this one thing that always sticks with me, and that I'm always going to be grateful to Abba for that. So I think that it's not very often that you get to meet your father-in-law or your future father-in-law before you actually meet your spouse. But this is what happened in my case. So my sister Irina, who is here, and I were at the Shabbat service in Kiev, Ukraine, in the congregation that, synagogue that we belong to. And there walks in, Rabbi Dresner +1. At that moment, we literally were introduced to Rabbi Dresner, and Avi was kind of like an afterthought. Not for me, of course. I literally couldn't take my eyes off of him and had butterflies probably the first and last time in my entire life. So we found out the following day at the train station in Kiev, heading to Uzhhorod, which is Western Ukraine, to the first ever, this is 1993, Jewish summer camp for the entire former Soviet Union Jewry, that Rabbi Dresner and his son are coming along, which is, I'm rooting, yay, great. And so we get there, we have 10 days in there. The rest of it is a blur, other than one thing that I really remember now that I, been part of this family. And that's the fact that Sai, who was supposed to teach us Hebrew as one of the things, right? He came basically as a small contingency of American and Israeli, primarily rabbis and educators, because we didn't have anyone to teach us. So we knew nothing ourselves, and we had absolutely no one to part that knowledge and share that knowledge, with us, from Hebrew all the way to, tradition, Torah, or services. And so the thing that stuck with me also is that Sai, who never got sick, never to the point that he actually had to literally not do something that he was supposed to, got sick in Uzhhorod and had to stay in bed. So Avi had to stand for him and teach my Hebrew class. We can talk in a separate forum at some point how much Hebrew I learned during that time. Very, ktsat. But we definitely, got to know each other better as a result of it. So this is not our story. Our story, maybe some other time, 7 years later, we were married, and, 200 snail mail letters and emails later. But the main thing, the main reflection that I have through this story is that we often think of activism as something that takes people away from their family, right? And so despite the fact that Abba was actually with Avi, right, he was there because of his activism, right? So here's another love because of his connection, you know, and roots to Ukraine, right? He was very involved with the former Soviet Union Jewry. And so he was there because of that. Avi was there simply because he was there, and it happened to be the summer during college, and he had nothing better to do, right? And his father, if I remember the story correctly, basically said, hey, Av, you wanna, you know, come with me? It should be fun. And I don't know, grudgingly or happily, Avi said, sure. And so, you know, looking back at that through his activism, I actually ended up, you know, getting my, you know, entire life, you know, my husband who is here, my 2 children that, you know, we would have never had, and those butterflies that I mentioned, right? Once in my entire life. So, you know, Abba, directly to you, I will forever be grateful to you for bringing Avi with you. And also for, you know, broadening my family, because, you know, that Tamar and Uncle Mark who are sitting out there are a big, you know, chunk of our family, you know, that we love and cherish. And I don't know if Aunt Phyllis and Eileen are still there, but we have a lot of fun when we see you as well. So thank you, Sai. May your memory always be a blessing. And thank you to all of you for being here.
You only got butterflies once looking at me?
Only for you.
Okay, okay.
That's what once meant.
Just to set your minds at ease with the creepo factor, I was her teacher. I was 23, she was 17. 17 in Ukraine is like 35 in America. So it was fine. I just want you to know that. Thank you, Natasha. I appreciate that. Speaking of Uncle Mark, Tamar's husband, my brother-in-law, my brother really, Mark Wolfson would also like to share the in-law perspective with us and with you. So Mark, go for it.
Thank you, Avi. If I could just echo, good evening, everybody. If I could just echo Natasha's remarks, it's very nice that we're surrounded by family. Ira's here, Natasha and Avi, the aunts are on, and when I say family, all of the usual suspects, Arthur Perchenko's up there, Janet Paul's here, Donna, you met the song, so very nice. I'd like to start by thanking everyone for their outpouring of support for the immediate family and for the comfort it seems to have provided for congregants and friends.
Mark, get closer to the mic, please. You're a little far away.
Mike, did you get the first sentence?
Better redo it.
Better
redo it. Go ahead.
Redo it. I'd like to start by thanking everyone for their outpouring of support for the immediate family and for the comfort it seems to have provided for congregants and friends. My condolences are with you all. When I first met Sai on Kibbutz Yad Batah in the Negev, where he spent time, we had a connection immediately. It was never Rabbi Dresner. It was Sai from day one. He was humble like that. A father-in-law who loved going to the movies, the beach, and Indian food. I met Tamar on the kibbutz, and after a few minutes, I knew she was the one, just like her father, asking questions and showing a true interest in other lives. A good person through and through, just like her father. Sai and I were never at a loss for conversation. Just in case you were wondering, I was born in Glasgow, Scotland, and of course, Sai knew more about Scottish, English, and Irish history than I could ever hope to. In wrapping up, I have been very lucky to be part of the Dresner clan, as I mentioned in my first remarks, but that the microphone may not have picked up. Ira's here, Natasha and Avi, the 2 aunts are on, so new cousins that I've never even spoken to, Gideon and Maya. It was really nice to hear from them as well. My brother Avi and his children do a better Scottish accent than I ever could. But more importantly than anything, I was now welcomed with open arms into a family, which includes Sai's 2 sisters, my aunts, with very high values. In particular, the need to eradicate anti-Semitism, bigotry, racism, and intolerance, which unfortunately rear their ugly heads more and more often across the globe. And now that Sai's not here, we all need to do our part to fight them in his memory. In closing with you tonight, from my perspective, as Sai and I would, each time we spoke on the phone, we would say to each other, shalom, shalom, and most importantly, look after your health. So be well and be safe to everybody.
Thank you, Mark. As you might say, that was great. So, all right. I know we don't have a ton of time. Dawn, has anyone made themselves known to you who would like to say anything, or?
Yes, Mark Gruber. Mark, you're still muted.
Yeah, I realized that. Thanks.
Okay, but you turned your video off too.
Figures. I'm doing very well technologically. There we go.
There you are.
I was on earlier in the week on another Shiva and didn't speak. And then I was remembering Sai at different times during the week to my wife. And then Friday night at services, I mentioned him in our service for Kaddish and shared with our congregation a little about Sai. And when I said to my wife, I'm going to go on Shiva tonight for Sai, she said, well, you should say something. I said, I don't need to say anything. She said, no, go say something. So I decided I would say something. And I guess I want to say something first, that Avi and Tamar, the way you're honoring your dad is really wonderful. I had written this to Avi, I guess a couple of weeks ago, just that I just think that it's such a blessing that you're honoring Sai when he knew you were honoring him. And there's something I think just kavod ha'av in that. That's you're a wonderful example for all of us. So thank you. And I hope that your project not only remembers your dad, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, but also that it gives you and your family a great deal of comfort and satisfaction. So with that said, I just share that it's kind of funny because Sai and I later on in later years talked about this, but I was a bar mitzvah actually at Tikva, but it was before Sai was there. It was when Shai Shacknai was the rabbi, and I was one of Cantor Ramal's very first students. We had moved from Totowa to Parsippany, and eventually settled congregation-wise at B'nai Or in Morristown, and I became a Jifty officer, national board member in charge of social action. And of course, that connected me with the rabbi from Springfield, Cy Dresner. And that was over half a century ago when Rabbi Dresner and I met. It certainly wasn't Cy. And our lives weren't connected all together in a in-person sense, but we connected certainly by our shared values all the time, and for elongated moments along the way. In college, when a group of us in Boston were starting a group called PIPA, the connection of Brera from the New York area, Sai and I were back in connection. And then in rabbinic school, I don't know who told them I was working on Judah Leon Magnus for my dissertation, and there was an interest there. And after I became a rabbi, along the way we were involved in lots of issues together, be they around Israel and Palestine, or social and economic justice, the broad range of issues. We served on the Commission for Social Action together, and I was so delighted to see Sai. I'm part-time in a small congregation, and we don't have services every Friday night. So my wife loves the services at Central Synagogue, as Sai did, and so we tune in. And I happened to be tuned in with Renee the night that you guys brought Sai there, and he was so wonderfully honored by Angela and had an aliyah. And I said something, to Renee, telling her more about who Sai was and how I knew him. And then I popped off a message to my friend and our mutual companion and comrade, Jerry Serrata, who then sent me back an article from the Forward, which had Avi's contact information in it. And Avi, thank you so much. You gave me a gift of having one more moment of connection with Sai by bringing him my message before he passed. And I just want to say, when I saw the CBS news piece that was done in New York, Avi, the link you sent me, I was so pleased that Sai's mind was clear, and his voice, which sometimes in arguments I was on the applauding side and sometimes I was on the receiving side, was still there, and it was Sai Dresner. It wasn't a shell of himself, and I can't think that you hadn't boosted his spirit with what you guys are doing, even through these last days. So thank you. המקום עמכם אתכם בתוך שאר ציון, אבלי ציון וירושלים.
Thank you, Mark. We really appreciate that. And I did read, I read your email, and Jerry's emails, to him in his final weeks, and it gave him a smile. So, Dawn, anybody else? You're
Sorry,
muted,
I'm
Dawn.
muted. No, sorry. No,
right,
I believe that's it.
So perfect. So let me share two pieces of news, and then I'll announce what's happening tomorrow on the last night of Shiva. The first piece of news, which some of you already know, is that the Washington Post published his obituary today. I believe Dawn has made that available on the website. If not, she will soon, based on her face.
Very soon.
She will soon. The New York Times is coming. I don't know when, but he's going to get the news obit that he wanted. He's already gotten it from the Post, and so that's very gratifying. I also want to share a piece of news that nobody knows yet, which is that just before Shiva started tonight, I got an email from a federal district court judge in South Carolina. He's actually the judge who handled the Dylan Roof trial, the shooting at the church in Charleston. He's the one who was the presiding judge at that trial. In addition to being a federal court judge, he is a Jewish history maven, and he has begun a webcast on Southern Jewish history. And in his email, he expressed his condolences to me and to the family, and also invited me to speak on February 13th at a webcast that they're going to be doing on the rabbis who went down south. And I will send Dawn that information as soon as I get it about that webcast. But I know it's going to be Sunday, February 13th, I think at 5:30 p.m. So I think that's 3 weeks from tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. And so that was exciting.
It's not 3 weeks. It's 3 weeks, 4 hours and 27 minutes.
Thank you, David. You're right. Forgive me.
Okay.
So that's the hot off the press news. Tomorrow night is it. It's our last night of Shiva. And as Mark gave a perfect segue to, we will be led by none other than Rabbi Angela Buchdahl of Central Synagogue. She will be leading our service. And our speaker tomorrow will be another one of Abba's cousins, his cousin Jay Schuster from California. who was from the Orthodox side of the family. So we sort of had a neo-Orthodox service tonight, and tomorrow we'll hear from that side of the family. Jay is as close to the Woody Allen of our family as we have, not in the pedophile way, God forbid, in these sort of nerdy 1970s Jewish sort of way. So I think you should enjoy that tomorrow. And other than that, I thank you all for being here. As always, thank you, Dawn, for your expert hosting of these Shivot. You're going to be getting hopefully a much deserved vacation after tomorrow night. I'm sure you'll need it. So thank you all for being here. Hopefully we'll see a lot of these faces tomorrow night and a lot of new faces as well. I'm sure a huge contingent of the Central Synagogue community will be with us tomorrow night as well. So thank you and good night.
Good night, Shavua Tov.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Dawn.
You're very welcome.